Human hearts, brains, and lungs stored in Tupperware and soda cups, a locker packed with spy gear, stolen vehicles, and a red-stained blade. And in North Carolina, a barbecue smoker auctioned off revealed a human leg wrapped in tinfoil. These are disturbing items found in abandoned storage units. In August 2012, a storage unit in Pensacola, Florida was auctioned off after the renter stopped paying. The unit had belonged to Michael Birkland, a former medical examiner who'd been fired years earlier for failing to complete autopsies. When the buyer opened the unit, he immediately noticed a strong chemical smell. Inside, investigators found over 100 human organs and tissue samples, including hearts, lungs, and brains. Stored in stuff like medical jars, makes sense. Tupperware makes less sense. And I kid you not, some of the remains were stored in soda cups, all filled with preservatives like formaldehyde. Many of the containers were also leaking, so that's great. They traced the remains to private autopsies Birkland had performed between 1997 and 2007. Birkland had said the unit just had household goods and sports equipment inside it. He was arrested on September 8, 2012, facing charges for improper storage of hazardous waste and creating a public nuisance. Authorities described the site as one of the most disturbing storage unit discoveries in U.S. history. Redditor Tinfoil Hat and Socks said their family has owned 2 storage facility locations for nearly 20 years, and in that time, they've seen some pretty strange stuff. One unit was full of what looked like spy gear, passports from multiple countries, foreign currency, night vision goggles, bulletproof vests, long-range camera lenses, bows and arrows. They locked it up, and 6 months later, after 17 months of unpaid rent, the renter showed up, paid cash in full, and hauled it all out. Another time they found stolen vehicles, motorbikes, cars, caravans, boats, all with a full Chinese dragon costume built for 20 people. One customer had fridges and freezers stored for years with food still in them. They found a homeless man living inside a unit who'd illegally tapped into the building's electrical system to set up a TV, a microwave, and a heater. He pooped in the garden, washed in a bucket, and showered under the fire hose system in the middle of the night. One person showed up claiming a briefcase held $1 million in cash. The facility staff escorted him, but inside the unit was just newspaper clippings. The renter was a paranoid schizophrenic who also claimed to have invented Harry Potter, Pokemon, Sonic, and the lottery. One time, 30 police officers with a search warrant opened up 4 units from one customer and walked out with a red-stained machete. The renter ended up serving 10 years in prison. Reddit user myglasses_myglasses worked in self-storage for nearly a decade, moving between different facilities. In that time, she became convinced that at least 2 of those locations were genuinely haunted. One of the creepiest was a 4-story building with around 700 units, no windows on the upper floors, and usually only 1 or 2 people working inside. The place always had an eerie stillness about it, especially at night. Sometimes the sound of boxes shifting or footsteps would echo from the upper floors, even when no one else was there. This particular story happened back in 2013, so on certain days, the Redditor had to do walkthroughs alone, which could be pretty unsettling at times. Her mom lived nearby though, so sometimes she'd come along to keep her company. There was one regular customer they both knew pretty well, a homeless man with schizophrenia who rented a unit on the 2nd floor. He often talked to himself, but was never dangerous. But one day, as they stepped off the elevator onto the 2nd floor, they suddenly heard a man's voice echoing down the hallway. It was clear, loud, and definitely male, but the words didn't make any sense. Both of them froze, immediately assuming it was probably that customer having one of his conversations with himself. They didn't think much of it until later, when the Redditor checked the building's security system. To enter, tenants had to punch in their access codes at the front door and again in the elevator. But the system showed no activity. No one had entered or exited in over 2 hours. When they replayed the cameras, the feeds showed nothing but empty halls. No one was on that 2nd floor. No movement, no sound system, no intercoms, nothing that could have made that noise. Yet both of them heard it, as clear as if someone was standing right there. On October 3rd, 2025, a man named Bill McFarland in Lincoln, Nebraska, discovered a hand grenade while unpacking boxes he'd purchased from a storage unit auction. The grenade still had its pin intact. McFarland immediately called the cops, and the city's hazardous device team responded. The storage unit had contained a mix of personal items and boxes, none of which seemed dangerous at first glance. McFarland said he'd purchased storage units in the past and occasionally found suspicious items, but nothing to that level. Luckily, though, they were able to safely remove the grenade, and no one was hurt. In 2007, a storage unit auction in Maiden, North Carolina sold off a locker that contained a barbecue smoker. When the buyer opened the smoker, he wasn't expecting to find find a human leg wrapped in tinfoil, but he did. The leg belonged to a man named John Wood, who'd lost it in a plane crash in 2004 and had requested that it be returned so he could be buried with it when he died. Wood had placed the leg in the smoker in the storage unit, which later went to auction after he stopped paying rent. Now, for some reason, the buyer, Shannon Wisnat, didn't want to give the leg up. This led to a legal dispute. The case, unsurprisingly, received a lot of attention at the time. They even made a documentary about it in 2015 called Finders Keepers, which followed the back and forth between the guy who lost the leg and the buyer trying to turn it into some kind of roadside attraction. In the end, John Wood got his leg back. Shannon Wisnat's case wasn't strong enough. According to Captain Tracy Ledford of the Maiden Police Department, the guy didn't have a leg to stand on. I don't get it. This next story comes from a now deleted Reddit user who wrote, "A friend of mine had a company which acquired another company, and with it a bunch of storage units. These units had all sorts of bizarre junk in them. The company they bought had itself inherited them from a separate acquisition. Somewhere in the rubble, they found this. This is the image the Redditor shared. The user then continued, they of course called the police, but Detroit PD didn't get out of bed for anything less than a severed arm or head. Literally, that's what he was told. Call us if you find an arm or head. And to make the story a little more WTF, I posted this pic on our WTF back in the day and received no less than a dozen PMs of people asking if this stuff was for sale or trade. Some of them seemed about as legitimate as you could expect, i.e. dental students, but a few weird ones wanted them for like arts and crafts. One said never mind when I asked what they wanted them for. A Redditor named KVLTD Adio, an employee at Iron Mountain, a company that primarily stores paper documents, shared one of the creepiest experiences they ever had working there. They said the local police department used the location to store standard reports and statements. Evidence and crime scene items were normally kept in a separate official police storage facility. One day, though, the staff received a call alerting them there had been a mistake. Some evidence had been accidentally placed in the regular storage area. The problem was no one knew which box it was or when it had been sent. Since police were not allowed to enter the facility without a warrant, the employees had to conduct the search themselves. After a week of going through thousands of boxes, they finally located the misplaced evidence. Inside a box containing miscellaneous paperwork were two sealed baggies. One contained a square of carpet soaked in dried blood. The other held a large kitchen blade, also coated in dark dried liquid. Employees never learned the full story, but obviously wasn't good. It was a sweltering July morning in Los Angeles when a man won a small storage unit at auction. At first glance, the unit looked pretty normal. Boxes, old furniture, some busted chairs, but the second he pried open a rusted filing cabinet, he nearly fainted. Inside was a live alligator at least 4 feet long, coiled up and hissing. Behind it, Eric noticed several duffel bags stuffed with some green stuff you smoke and a small stash of firearms. The unit had apparently been abandoned for months, rented by a man who authorities later said was involved in low-level substance trafficking. The gator was safely removed and it survived. It had been living off of leftover scraps in the unit, apparently. In November 2015, a Tampa storage unit auctioned off its contents to a man who expected to find old furniture, maybe some antiques. What he got instead were dozens of mummified cats, carefully wrapped in linen and stacked in small wooden crates. The unit had belonged to a retired antiques collector who died earlier that year, leaving the unit unpaid for months. Authorities were called when the buyer realized these cats were real, and they were remarkably well preserved, even though some looked to be hundreds of years old. The cats were transferred to a local university's anthropology department, and researchers found they'd been preserved using a weird mix of Egyptian-style mummification and more modern home methods. In September 2023, a skull appeared in a North Fort Myers thrift shop, catching the eye of an anthropology student, Rochelle Martinez. At first glance, it looked like a prop, but Martinez quickly realized it was a real human skull. It had come from a storage unit auction the previous year in January 2022, rented by a man who'd stored medical curiosities and oddities. He died, stopped paying for the unit, and it eventually went up for auction. The medical examiner confirmed it was from a Native American woman that had probably been dead decades. I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.